of Allegiance before we begin the meeting. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Take your seats. Good evening. I'm Mayor Mike Beck. I think most of council's here. I saw we just lost the microphone. That didn't work. Deputy Mayor Norris Clark, Councilman Conrad, and Manager Ridgway, and we're happy to see everybody show up tonight. Bill Galestock's here, was our planner, and Stu Farrell will be taking over. He's our hired gun. This is not working.
You want to try the microphone, Mike?
Yeah.
Here.
When the Hurricane Sandy hit, they came with what they called the ABFE. And they were the preliminary maps, and they stopped the mapping, which actually had begun before there, a remapping according to FEMA standards, which had begun before that, but they came with the preliminary maps shortly after Sandy so that those towns that had been damaged significantly could rebuild. Truthfully, we did not know at that point that there was going to be a continuation of the mapping system up through the bay, and that the V zone would be involved for a lot of our residents and further up the bay through Middle to a number of towns. I think we got the news probably around August of 2013. A couple months later, in dealing with Middle Township and trying to sort stuff out, we reached out to a professional, and that's where Stu Farrell comes in, Dr. Farrell. And he is probably one of the leading experts in the field on this particular subject and how to appeal to FEMA. So he's been at it for about a year now, and I think I'm going to turn it right over to him just so that he can give you an update as to where we're at, what we've done in the appeal process, and what we have for the future, what the outlook is for this town as far as that part goes. So here we go. Dr. Farrell, you ready? You got your own mic.
Let's see, I think this one works, yes. Well, good evening. It's been an interesting ride. The National Flood Insurance rate maps were being updated as early as 2011. I know that because I went to, well, at the request of the governing body of the city of Brigantine, there's a bunch of folks that live along the oceanfront South Brigantine where the shoreline has accreted seaward about 1,000 feet since 1983. And these homes were still in the V zone. And so we started a process of doing what was called a letter of map revision to revise the V zones based on the fact that things had changed and changed for the better in terms of these folks' outlook on the possibility of being flooded. They basically had a zero probability of wave damage with the ocean over 1,000 feet away. So we go to deal with the Region 2, which is our FEMA region. It's headquartered in New York City. And they said, well, hey, you know, why should you go through this ordeal? We're redoing the maps anyway. Why don't you see what happens when we come out with the preliminary maps? Well, Hurricane Sandy brought forth the advisory version of the preliminary maps right after the storm, followed up by the release of actually about 13 months later, of what they call the preliminary flood insurance rate maps. Now you can see these yourselves on a computer at the FEMA Region 2 website. Best available flood information is, I think, the way you Google search it. And you can zoom in successively right to your view of your home. I mean, you can see your house on the map and see exactly where you stand on these preliminary maps. Now, once we looked at them carefully and wrung our hands over the fact that a lot of the bayshore coastline was now a wave velocity zone, where it had never been mapped as such previously in the earlier versions of the maps. Wondered how this happened and what was going to become of it. FEMA classifies the shoreline based on potential for wave damage. If they predict that a 100-year storm or a storm with a 1% annual chance of reoccurrence, a long way of saying the same thing, but that's how they put it. So the 1% annual chance storm will generate a 3-foot high wave on the water surface at the flood elevation. Whatever that flood elevation comes to be, there's now a 3-foot wave on top of that water surface during the storm event. Properties landward of that point are considered to be wave velocity zone properties. And that means you must build above that 3-foot wave elevation by 1 foot. So if the base flood elevation is like 8 feet, the 3-foot wave takes you up to 11 feet plus the foot freeboard. You have your first horizontal structural member of the house or business has to be at elevation 12 in the engineering datum called North American Vertical Datum of 1988, which supersedes the vertical datum of 1929 that we had been using for decades. Well, the 88 datum is what these maps are done in. The difference between the two datums is approximately 1.3 feet. The number in the 29 datum gets 1.3 subtracted from it to get exactly the same elevation in the 1988 datum. So 10 becomes 8.7 in the new datum. So that's one thing you kind of got to stick in your heads. There's a difference between those two elevation markers, and that difference is approximately 1.3 feet in Cape May County. The county governing bodies, code enforcement officials, engineers, all got together in January of 2013 with the Cape Atlantic Coalition, where everybody who had something to say about this got together, and we are still meeting monthly at the Ventnor City Library, discussing all kinds of things regarding flood insurance mapping and the impact of it. I mean, for example, if the house is raised up because it's in a higher flood level and the electric meter is on the side of the house and it goes up 4 feet, you know you have to put a platform with stairs and a railing so that the guy can read the meter. But if your side yard is only 3 feet, you can't get a 4x4 foot square platform on your property. So little things like that are an ongoing problem. It's still going round and round about a few of these things. So the big picture all comes down in lots of cases to little teeny pictures too that are all sources of problems. Now, where are we today? FEMA has essentially held in December of 2014, December 12th, the Cape May County Regional Meeting explaining the maps. The county printed up for each municipality large-scale foam core-backed maps and had them at the meeting in Cape May City. And you could have come and discussed it with FEMA at that meeting. Many folks did. I was there for Middle Township, and we essentially got our act together on some of the things we were facing. So with that done, now the issue comes to there is going to be a municipality by municipality discussion, which then leads to putting the maps out for appeal. The official appeal date has yet to be announced. Theoretically, a month ago they said mid-March. I haven't heard boo that has been set up formally in any way. The appeal period starts, then you have 90 days from that appeal period to file an appeal for various issues that you may find with your particular property. And as that came to pass, what happened? Oh, okay. As that came to pass, I started a program with both Middle and Lower Township to look at, in detail, the bayfront properties. Now, the flood elevations in the areas like Coxhall Creek and other places, those were all done with a new kind of technology called LIDAR, which is a vertical surveying program that's done by aircraft that gets several million data points in each part of the township. I mean, the whole, even your doghouse had a data point taken on the top of it using this LIDAR technique. So the elevations extracted for the base flood elevations of AE8, AE9, or AE10 were derived from this LIDAR elevation data. They then took the county and sliced it up in about 800-foot wide pieces and ran parallel transects across the county, stopping in the middle part. They didn't go all the way across the inland portions, but they ran from the bay through the salt marshes to the uplands, then started on the bay side by the parkway and went across the marshes, across the barrier islands, and ran traverses, which they then surveyed and brought back to the office where the mapping team was working. What was on these traverses: bulkheads, trees, fences, houses, buildings, highways, railways, anything at all that they found on each of these traverses, they had elevation data on those as well. And then they conducted what they called the Overland Wave Modeling Program, or the code name for it is WAFIS. And basically they ran these storm waves at the base flood elevation they had calculated inland to see where the waves dissipated, and that's where the boundary of the V-zone was drawn, where the wave height diminished below that 3-foot elevation. So that's where it stands right now. The appeal process will conclude eventually whenever they announce it's 90 days long, and what we're trying to do right now is tell you that if you have a property that is located in one of these V-zone areas and you happen to have, for whatever reason it was there, a bulkhead between your property and the bayshore, there is a way out of the V-zone for the house. FEMA has said, at that, I quizzed them extensively at the meeting in December, what if an engineer is willing to certify that that bulkhead will be there the morning after the 1% annual chance storm happens? Would that be a qualifier to say that that structure would essentially be the item that absorbs the wave hits, absorbs the storm's energy, and that the house could be said to be not a V-zone house? And the answer was absolutely. That is true. And I said, okay, suppose a bulkhead goes in front of 5 or 6 or 8, in some cases 10 or 11 homes, all the same bulkhead, all the same structure. Does each property owner have to hire an engineer to certify their piece of it? The answer was no. If the bulkhead was contiguous across 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 properties, one certification would do for all of those contiguous owners. So that's a great one, because we have one here in Lower Township. I call it site number 29. It's located, it's a very nice new vinyl bulkhead. It's located between Beach Plum Road and Delview Road in the Villas. So that was the site. There are essentially 15 dwellings behind this bulkhead. If you get an engineer to certify that this bulkhead was built to withstand the 100-year storm and get that certification into the township before that appeal period ends, we will gather them all together and hand them in as the township's appeal package to FEMA all at once. And you won't have to do a separate letter of map revision yourselves. Because if you let the appeal period go by and they make the maps official, they're adopted, then you build the bulkhead, you're on your own for a letter of map revision. You can do it, but it's going to cost more money. So without going into all of the weeds of this, that's basically what's happened. We found a lot of properties with bulkheads. Some of those are not really storm-related bulkheads. They're kind of to keep folks off the dunes in front of the house. I mean, a wall of concrete blocks and a little puddle of concrete in the sand isn't going to make it as a storm barrier. So there has to be, nobody's going to certify that. But there's an awful lot of structures out there with decent bulkheads in Lower Township particularly. I've seen several of them built over the last 5 years. In fact, I visited one for the state where they were thinking of turning the whole of Lower Township into a bluff shoreline at DEP for permit purposes instead of a barrier island shoreline. And you better be glad they didn't, because then you couldn't build within 150 feet of the bluff, which would be kind of disastrous out there. I mean, as far as replacing or rebuilding or reconstructing, it would have been awful. So they finally said, no, bluff's only 5 feet high. We won't make it a bluff shoreline like the Raritan Bay up there in northern part of the coast. And that's basically it. I'm sure you'll have a bunch of problems. I probably raised more questions than I've answered.
The legislation that FEMA has to follow. Yeah.
Okay, how come we got what we got? There are two methods FEMA utilized to create the V-zone boundary. First and foremost was the effect of the primary frontal dune. They defined the primary frontal dune as the seaward crest of that feature that extends to the edge of the beach. So that's that frontal dune. Now, if that feature has sand in it seaward of the crest and higher than the base flood elevation, which you can figure is about 8 feet, then that particular feature will be the shore protection feature if it has more than 540 square feet of surface area vertically between the crest, the base flood elevation, and out to where that intersects the beach out on the shoreline. Nothing meets that standard. So it's all considered not a flood protection feature. So the primary frontal dune gets mapped to the landward toe of the landward slope. So you come from the beach up the dune to the crest, that's the seaward slope, and then you slope downward till you reach the flat land, landward of it, and that's the landward toe. So they sat there with their maps and they drew the line just following the contour elevations on their LiDAR data, and they weren't looking at your house. They just drew right through it if it's where the contours were. And they drew some really funky ones too. They had one gentleman who was elevation 18 NAVD88, and he was put in the V zone. Meanwhile, the house in front of him, closer to the bay, was elevation 12, and he was not even in the shaded X zone. So he wasn't even in the 500-year flood zone. We said, somebody screwed up here, boys. They said, yeah, we made it. Okay, we'll fix that one. So we got one little thing fixed out of the whole lot. But they said because the legislation that creates the flood hazard mapping itself defines the primary frontal dune as going to the landward edge of the landward slope, everything in that footprint is V-zone, regardless of the relative value of it to be a flood hazard or not a flood hazard. That's the rules. If there is no dune, and that would be Pierce's Point, Reed's Beach, no frontal dune. They then use what they call the wave model, the WAFIS model, to say where would that 3-foot wave dissipate going landward, and then they drew the V-zone boundary based on the WAFIS model. Now it turns out, had they used the WAFIS model on all of Lower Township, nobody'd be in a V-zone. Guarantee it. Because guess what? At Reed's Beach, the V-zone ends in the water. Very few of the houses in Reed's Beach are actually V-zone properties. Some are, but not many. So I said, how can you do that? That's the rules. Okay. So there's where we stand with this business about primary frontal dune is what you have in Lower Township for almost all of it, and a map to the landward toe of the landward slope. And that was what puts you in the problem area.
Has anyone tried to fight that rule? And
Yes.
what are
Well,
how do we go about fighting that?
Well, fighting that rule, that's legislative. I asked Gang Guy, I said, how did we, how'd you come to this? And they said that's how it was set up. That's legislative,
Federal?
federal.
Can you give a definition of what the VE zones mean and AE?
Well, the V zone, A zone, the E is just the elevation.
I'm just.
Yeah. The V,
don't know what that
vertical elevation, it says VE means vertical elevation, and the number is the number of feet above zero NAVD 88. So VE 11 is 11 feet above zero. Generally, zero is somewhere between mean low water and mean high water. It's not mean tide, it's not mean sea level, it's just an arbitrary zero somewhere floating in space defined by the engineering fraternity. And so it's somewhere between high and low tide, so you're essentially looking at about 11 feet above mid-tide generally. And a lot of the ocean, the bayfront's well above that. I mean, we're talking 16 feet is not an unusual number out there for the crest of the dune. But it's all mapped as V-zone north of Fern Road. Between Fern Road and Lincoln Boulevard, they stopped the V-zone at the Bayside Road. Bay Shore Road or Bay Road or what do you call it, Bell? Bay Shore? Shore Road. Bay Drive, Shore Road, Beach Road, whatever it is, they stopped the V-zone at that road. So people who lived east of the road are not V-zone properties. And you're not in any flood hazard zone at all. Okay. That's where we stand.
How about pilings?
Well, one of the problems with V-zone rules are that the house has to be built on pilings with the lowest horizontal structural member a foot above the VE elevation. I know most of the houses are block foundations, so you would be non-conforming properties. And non-conforming properties is going to get you right between the eyes when it's time to pay flood insurance rates if these maps become adopted. And if you say, well, I don't need no flood insurance, I don't have a mortgage. Well, the guy that buys it from you might need one, and that's where the asking price gets cut in half or so, because they won't pay what you think the place is worth if it has to pay flood insurance. I had a guy complain to me today on the phone. He's 1,000 feet from the water's edge. His flood insurance is $4,500 this year. Now, of course, don't cry for him. It's $1.5 million house, but still. But then again, you don't get covered for $1.5 million. You get covered for $265,000. That's the cap. That's all you get back if the house disappears in the storm. Gone. There's no house left. Okay.
Yeah.
You have any?
We'll take questions now for Dr. Farrell, but it would be beneficial if you have questions about your specific property, then maybe you come up afterwards and ask those. If you have generalized questions that would apply to any property, I think that would be appropriate to ask in the public forum and then wait till the end if it's something to do with your specific house. So we'll make sure everybody gets a chance. So if you come up and get in front of the microphone, just identify who you are and, ask your question. Thank you. Is that on? I don't think so. Jim, would you check that, please? Try this mic here.
The red light came on.
See if this comes on.
The light's on now.
There you go. It's good.
Folks, there's a representative here this evening also from the J. Byrne Agency, Lynn Miola in the back. If you have individual questions about your homeowner policies, there'll be also someone that can take those questions.
Hi, my name is Paul Brady. We live on the end of Wildwood. I have one question. It came up earlier that they're using an ocean model on the bay. Is there any way we could do like some sort of class action argument in that respect? Because it's ridiculous to, like, we're classified like a barrier island in Florida. It's absolutely ridiculous. And how can FEMA put the responsibility on us to get a new model? They can't, like, penalize us for this because they don't have an insufficient model. And then my second question is a lot of the bayfront, they have basements. Like our house has a concrete basement, and a lot of the houses do. They were built in the 50s. You know, what's the circumstance with that for those two questions?
Well, the first question is, the ocean model is essentially has no fetch limit. The winds can blow across 1,000 miles of water. So that adds, you know, that means the wave heights can be 30 feet.
Exactly.
The wave periods can be 15, 18 seconds. Delaware Bay, the maximum fetch is 25 miles from the southwest direction. Other fetches are a lot shorter. And so we brought that up at some of these meetings we've been having over the past year and a half, and said, look, you know, your model, you're using your ocean wave model on Delaware Bay. And they also, what was even more entertaining is they used it in Grassy Sound. So the answer was, well, we did scale it back some. Now, what some means, I have no idea, but thing is that V-zone defined by the legislation in the act that creates the federal flood insurance program is, they say there's nothing we can do about that. That's defined by law. Well, that defined by law on the Delaware Bay shoreline is pretty extensive. I mean, many of those houses should never be in the V-zone. They just shouldn't. They're hundreds of feet from the edge of the dunes. So the answer to your first question is no, they did not use a bay-specific wave model in Delaware Bay. They used the same one they use everywhere else. Now the other question
About a basement.
about the basements. Basements are a problem in any flood zone. If there's any equipment in the basement, then that equipment becomes the lowest elevation.
Even if the basement's been there for 60 years,
Doesn't matter.
A drop of water in it. It's ridiculous.
Doesn't matter.
I mean,
They're going to map it. And when the guy comes from the insurance company and looks at it, or if they do look at it, you want to keep them away from the basement. Because if there's flooding outside, then the pressure on that wall, they'll calculate it and say, well, the wall's going to collapse and the house will come down, and that's a problem.
so is there any use of doing a class action suit to get them to force them to make a bay model?
I'm not a legal expert. I couldn't tell you what
Did
that
the
would be.
township get any guidance on that, or?
Has anyone tried it?
No,
No one's tried it.
no one's tried it.
We're gonna find out.
Okay.
Yeah, that has not been even brought up to them about, you know, we brought up to them, did you use the same model? The answer was yes.
Did they come here? I did.
Thank you.
Good evening. Ed Butler from the Village. A few questions for Dr. Farrell. Following a little bit with this, what recommendations does DEP recommend to protect Lower Township along the shoreline? From the Delaware, from the Delaware Bay, from Cape May Point, north to Middle Township and the shores, what recommendations did they make? Was it a berm? Was it
No, they didn't.
I think it's
But-
from the Corps of Engineers.
Well, there was a project.
beds or what? What was the recommendation?
There is an environmental restoration project been on the books for 25 years to put a beach and a better dune the entire length to Bidwell Creek. I was at a meeting in Lower Township 20 years ago with Bernie Moore, and the folks there at the time wanted no part of it, and so it didn't happen. It's still an authorized project. It's a federal Philadelphia District Corps of Engineers environmental restoration project. Funding is the problem. If Congress doesn't give them the money, they can't build it.
All right, so
Let me just-
funding would be actually between federal, state, and local, as far as sharing different things for,
It would be the usual formula.
just like they have along the coast. It seems like along the Atlantic coast, they've been putting these berms up, working on it, and it don't cost actually the property owners anything. Well, indirectly it probably does because of the funding.
Well, there's a local
But-
share.
But it's
Yeah.
absorbed by everybody. It's going to be protected.
Correct.
From any storm that hits, and not just from oceanfront or bayfront property owners that would have to pick up the blunt of actually the cost, like putting in a bulkhead. Who would pick that up?
Well, if the Corps of Engineers gets to go ahead with congressional funding to put the sand on the beach, then it would be, if the formula is followed, 65% federal, 35% state. The state always agrees to fund 75% of the 35%, so the local share is 8.75%. So $87,500 out of every million spent would be the local's share, spread across the entire township tax base.
Because what happened with it, what would happen here if we got a severe storm come across that bay, and the property owners all had bulkheads across there, and it would breach that and come down. This whole township's flooded. It's all downhill from the bay side, which is the highest point of land that there is, or the shore area. Everything, including down here on the other side, would be completely flooded. But yet, it comes down to where the property owner is going to be responsible to try to protect not their own property, but everybody's property.
Well, you're talking to a higher level of,
All right. Yeah, but that's exactly what would happen. If you lived here and you see it and you know the lay of the land like we did with your survey, I saw them up on the beach in front of my property and all, and I'm looking at like, in fact, I have a letter from the DEP that says my property is okay, that I have no problem with it because I went through the mitigation. And yet, now, looking at the maps and all, it's in there. But I have written documentation from them,
well,
even though it's up on cinder blocks. So I don't know where they're coming from on this.
well, they just defined the V zone based on the legislation, and they told the mapping team map the landward toe of the landward slope, and that's what they did, and they just said, okay, everything's in. And why they went down Beach Road and said, well, we're going to use that as the boundary, you'd have to ask them, because I didn't understand that one either.
Well, there's a lot of things that can't be understood. It's actually just somebody making decisions that I don't really live in the area, been in there, understand it, to see what it is in the severest storms. I don't want to take too much of your time up, but actually, as far as the berm and stuff like that, I'd like to see that pursued more so than bulkheads. The properties that you mentioned, 5 together, or whatever, on the ends of them, if you had a flood, it would wash out the back of them too eventually.
Well, you're talking about the next 100 years, so most of us aren't going to be here to see it. But yes, the shoreline
I
retreat.
hope not. I couldn't keep even talking at that time. But thank you. I
Okay, well,
understand that.
Let me just add one point. Stu mentioned the Army Corps project that has been discussed and not funded for these many years along the bay. Right after Sandy, the mayor led a team of us up to see the Department of Environmental Protection. The head of that department is Bob Martin. And after Sandy, he had a whole map and a plan that was about to be announced by the governor. It basically said that they were going to use Sandy money to provide shore protection all along the ocean coast on up to the bay, along where we all are. And they were going to fund, they told us, they said, well, I'll never forget it, gave us every reason to believe that this project was going to be funded, and we all came back, high-fiving each other that that was going to be a great addition. But when it got right down to it, they determined that the premise behind our shore protection was not a storm protection. The premise was based on environmental issues such as the red knots and the horseshoe crabs, and that they could not use Sandy money for that. So they basically went back on what they originally had planned to do. So there was a period there where we were living under the false hope of seeing that long-awaited project funded, which would have provided the kind of protection that that you're talking about. It was a big disappointment.
Okay. And so there has to be, during the 90-day period, there'll be a meeting with FEMA here, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So,
Howard Carl, I'm at West Delaware Parkway on the bay.
yes.
I'm not sure the date of the meeting, but FEMA was here at a meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I asked you at that meeting if you were aware that the township, much of the township was protected by bulkhead. And you weren't too sure of how much or where. And since then, I don't know if any engineering study was done. I'm kind of wondering why we're in the position of having to appeal something now when it should have never been instituted in the first place.
This is what Stu did with I don't think that he really explained exactly what had taken place, but he did the length of
Lower Town.
Lower
What's
Township.
done?
He
Yeah.
got a study
Right.
and went from basically.
Yeah.
firm
Right.
We went through the whole thing, Howard.
Great, wonderful. Now, my question is this. The northern part of town, that I'm familiar with, what's referred to as Miami Beach on old maps, is contiguous bulkhead for much of the stretch of it. In getting an engineering certification, if that's certified to be protective of this 3-foot hypothetical wave, that also protects all the landside properties blocks in. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yes. Well, everybody in the V zone no longer is, and the V zone stops at the bulkhead.
Right.
Or a splash zone. Sometimes they create a splash zone of 10, 15, or 20 feet wide landward of the bulkhead because of the height of the bulkhead. So it's variable, but the V zone stops at the bulkhead,
Okay.
which means nobody in the houses landward of the bulkhead are V zone properties anymore.
Well, if that's the case, wouldn't it make sense to have township engineers certify these bulkheads because it's, rather than the individual property owners that have the bulkheads, because those bulkheads are protecting all the landward properties inward. So can't the township engineer certify it?
Let me just say that would be something the council would have to address. I don't think any of us here specifically, we don't even know what the cost would be. I have no idea, Howard, so I can't answer that question right now.
Well, as a property owner affected by this, it would be very, very helpful to know what process, all I'm being told is I got 90 days to do something. And I'm not sure what I need to do, where I need to go to do it. All I know is that something needs to be done. So need some direction from you folks as to what we need to do and who needs to do it. And I'm thinking that, it's...
Look, what we did, Howard, let me make sure you understand. We were presented with this thing. This parachuted in on us, like we said, September of 13. And we immediately went and got a professional who went the length. He went up and down. I don't think he really explained exactly what he did. He put a lot of time on the bayfront there. Used some of the quads that we had from the police department. They surveyed the whole bayfront, trying to find any potential glitches in their data, looking for the various bulkheads that were along there. Now, as Dr. Farrell has said, a lot of the bulkheads are, homemade. I mean, they're not specifically something that an engineer is going to certify. But, we just got the report back from FEMA as to where we're standing. So we're still digesting this. Now, there's a 90-day, and they haven't notified us, and I believe they have to notify us by letter prior to this 90-day period going into effect. And during the 90-day period, I believe they have to have a meeting here with the residents. So we're still in this process. But as far as the situation in certifying bulkheads engineering-wise, well, at this point, I don't know that the township can do that.
Yeah, well, let me just, I have the list that FEMA gave to us for what you would have to do for your bulkhead. I'll just tell you now. It says, this is in a response to comments submitted, that was Dr. Farrell's report, by Lower Township regarding preliminary work maps in Cape May County. And they're very specific about that it's only technical data. If you call them up and you give them your story, that isn't going to go anywhere. It has to be technical data, in this case by an engineer. So it says, in summary, the information listed below must be provided in order for walls and bulkheads to be considered in the analysis and mapping. 1. A flood hazard analysis of the structure's response during the 1% annual chance flood following FEMA's methodology and guidelines in sections, I'm not going to read all the sections, Atlantic Ocean and Gulf of Mexico Coastal Guidelines Update, February 2007. 2. Certification that the structure will withstand the forces of a 1% annual chance flood, as further detailed in that same study. A maintenance plan for for any certified structure or bulkhead per the requirements in that study. All ground and structure surveys must be certified by a registered professional engineer or a licensed land surveyor as detailed in page 12 appendix in FEMA's Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration Policy. Revised hazard mapping based on the revised analysis, ensuring tie-in to the flood zones in the surrounding area. And that's what you'd have.
Basically, that is the kind of boilerplate language of what I told you, that in fact, if the engineer is willing to give you a letter that says this bulkhead will withstand the 100-year or 1% chance of occurrence storm without failure, then they will adjust the boundary of the V zone to the bulkhead plus or minus, well, actually plus maybe a splash zone. Now, the splash zone will get bigger as the elevation on the top of the bulkhead decreases. It will have no effect at all if the bulkhead elevation is 4 feet less than the base flood elevation. So again, base flood elevation is 8 feet, and the bulkhead's only 4, and don't bother building it. It will do you no good at all. It doesn't have to be 12 feet, but it does have to be somewhere in that 7 to 9 foot range in height. Now, a lot of the bulkheads that we measured were 12 feet, and they were barely exposed above the sand. So we know that a lot of them meet these criteria without doubt, but I can't sign on it.
Well, the question is, who does? And do I, as a property owner, go up and down the shoreline soliciting participation from contiguous homeowners? And then do I go 3 blocks in and get 200 homeowners?
No, you don't have to. It's you. You are the one that faced the problem. You're the V-zone property owner. If there are V-zone property owners landward of your bulkhead that are included as a result of being behind you on the landward side of you, and they're still included in the V-zone, you can bring them into the mix. The questions we brought, this whole thing was discussed, and you'll have to talk it out with your council and committee people, because it's going to fall into whether or not the municipal engineer can do this for you while he's in the employ of the city. Does the city want, or the township want, to use township funds to do this for not everybody, because everybody doesn't need it. So therein lies the rub. You get tangled up in the New Jersey State Statute of Ethics laws and conflicts of interest. So that's what the problem kind of is. But if they can work that out, there's no reason they can't. There's no reason they have to either. So, I mean, it's kind of, this is a discussion you have to have with your local governing body.
Thank you. I don't know if that works at all.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Tom Chestnut. I'm from Town Bank. We have those jetties going out. Those jetties were put in the late 60s to stop flooding. What are you going to do in that area?
Well,
If the jetties are there, are they going to take these jetties out?
No.
They're going to leave the jetties in, but you're
Yes.
still going to need a bulkhead,
Yes.
even though I'm 30 foot above sea level.
Well, you're further, where are you at? You're all the way down.
I'm right down by the beach. I'm 300 feet off of the beach.
You're not in the B zone, are you?
I have no idea. According to this map, everybody is.
I think that
Behind me
you're
is.
on the other side. I
The
think
people
B zone-
behind me are in it,
Yeah.
which is
I'm not sure what the street
Unbelievable.
is. I thought you were further
I'm on
down.
Beverly.
Ask him if he got a letter.
Did you get a letter?
I got a letter from my insurance company telling me you don't need flood insurance, but if there's a flood, you have to pay a better premium. which to me is ridiculous.
Well, that's called repetitive loss. Stop.
Yeah.
What street are you on?
I'm on Beverly.
You're not in the V zone. You're further down.
Right, but the people behind me are in it.
Well, they're in an A zone.
No,
I don't know what zone they're in, but I know the block down from me is only 4 foot above sea level.
the V zone runs along the bayfront, and it's further north of where you're located.
Well, according to this map here, where that blue line is, it's behind me.
Coxhole Creek. You're
Coming back down to where
you got a different. You got groundwater
Yeah, I know.
issues. Well, this is the surge from the.
So my question is, are they going to put a bulkhead on the beach right in front of us?
No,
Where there stays.
listen.
That's what I want to know.
There's nothing that's proposed. I mean, reality is we're still trying to sort out exactly what FEMA has determined. I mean, if FEMA had said, okay, we're going to disregard the V zone, and they removed the whole thing, we probably don't even have this meeting. So this is just something that's coming on us now.
Okay.
And I mean, you're talking some big ticket items. If you say that you want to replace, say, build a dune along the whole coastline. And I don't know that the township can carry water on something like that. That might be something where we need to get the state and federal officials down here to kind of help us with this. I mean, these regulations, I think a lot of us wish we had never heard of FEMA.
Right.
I mean, being quite honest with you, I mean, we were pretty darn happy a couple of years ago,
See,
And now the bottom's falling out, and all I'm saying is that we're adjusting as you are, but some of the answers may not be found in this building.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Jim Murray from Reed's Beach.
Yes, sir.
My bulkhead is at about 9.5 foot, and I'm in V11. Would that put my house in a splash zone then?
There'd be a splash zone. I know some of them are pretty close to the bulkhead.
And will that affect the insurance rate being in a splash zone as opposed to?
That's a question for the insurance adjusters,
Oh.
pretty much. I mean, I don't know how wide the splash zone's going to be put. Say, now, the line, as it's drawn, have you looked to see whether your property is at all involved with the VE zone in front of Reed's Beach? I know it clips some of the houses.
No, I'm in the V zone.
You're in the V zone.
I think in Reed's Beach, the end of the V zone is the road.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Pretty much. So if the bulkhead is at 9 feet, it will probably serve, but there will be a splash area, whether or not that is a 3-foot wave splash area, what they call the limit of moderate wave activity.
Second page.
Fancy name is the LIMWA, the limit of moderate wave activity, which is a 1.5-foot wave. And there are no insurance adjustment downsides to the LIMWA zone yet.
Okay, now there's 8 properties that all share pretty much a common bulkhead. They were all put in at different times, all by different people. Some constructed of vinyl, some wood, some old, mine's only probably 5 years old, has concrete between the new and the old bulkhead. If I were to raise my bulkhead to the 11 foot for the V11, if I were to add like a couple of feet to my bulkhead, would that then take me out of the splash zone?
Yeah, I would.
Can I do that just to my bulkhead, even though
Yes, you can.
that we share a bulkhead, there's 8 properties that share a bulkhead?
You may raise yours to 11. Now, of course, I know there's a company that does provide this service.
Right.
They'll actually raise the bulkhead. You don't need a permit to do that because you're adding to the existing
Right.
bulkhead.
Right.
So, yes, you can go do that. Would that mitigate the splash zone? I would say it would.
So that would take me out of the V zone then?
Yes.
Now, if I only do that on my property, but my neighbor 10 feet away doesn't do his, the water comes over the bulkhead and is going to wash around.
Well, yeah, but the wave won't. Well, see, the V zone is based on the wave attack, not the flooding. The flooding is going to be elevation 8. That's the still water elevation on the bay during the 100-year event. So 8, 8.2, 8.3, whatever they calculate it to be. The wave is on top of that, and that's in motion. So if you block that wave with your 11-foot wall, what comes around the sides is nothing.
Okay, now, what do I have to do with FEMA to make sure that if I go to this expense and get engineers and all that and do this, how do I get FEMA to sign off on it before I spend all that money?
No, they'll only sign off on it after you spend the money.
That doesn't make sense.
Well, that's the way they do it. They don't give you a carte blanche based on what you say you're going to do. You have to do it and present it to them as a fait accompli. It's done. This is what I did, and then they pass judgment on it.
But will they put it in writing that if I do this, then they will take it out of the visa?
I can't answer that one for you, sir. I just can't.
Okay, the other thing is I thought there was going to be FEMA people here.
No.
You know, we've heard all kinds of numbers, like if you're a foot below, your house is a foot below the BFE, your rates are going to be this. We've heard a lot of rumors, but I haven't seen anything anywhere, set in stone. Is there anything out there right now that if you're 2 feet below, this is what
Well,
you're going to
we have
pay?
somebody that's waiting. We got to get through the questions so that we have, I think, a lady, Jim, for the insurance industry that's here.
You direct
Okay.
that question to the
Yeah, so
Okay,
if you
good.
can, we can get through these questions, and then we can have her talk for a minute or two.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Alice Dallapaloo, and I live in the Town Bank area. My question is actually about the AE zone. Could you explain what that is and why we are in a flood situation?
Basically, they surveyed the topography, everything. And if they if the base flood elevation, the base flood elevation is 8.0 or 8.2 or 8.3, they drew basically a bathtub ring around the land at 8.3 feet everywhere. So if you're at 8.3 feet or below that for the ground around the house, then it's in the AE 8 zone. In some cases, they said, well, the flooding's going to be 8.6, so they round to the nearest whole number. They have an AE 9 zone as well. It will be less than 9, but it's rounded up to 9. So there, the elevation is 9 feet. So anything below either the 8 or the 9 is in what's called the flood hazard area, which simply means that if your first floor elevation is above that by 1 foot, you must buy flood insurance if you have a mortgage, but the rate you pay will be mitigated by being above the 100-year flood. Now, if you're at elevation 10, the rates drop. If you're at 11, basically it's a minor annoyance, but you still have to buy it.
Yeah.
Get rid of the mortgage, you don't have to buy it.
But now I'm hearing that the insurance companies are telling people that are paying off their mortgage that they have to buy flood insurance anyway.
No, absolutely
That's
not.
a rumor that's going
No,
on.
they don't have to buy it. If you don't have a mortgage, you don't have to buy flood insurance unless you want to.
Well, the new owners would be under that.
Well, that's up to the new owners. If they have a mortgage, they're going to have to pay for the policy, not you. You're the seller.
Well,
Your
you-
policy goes extinct when you sign the papers.
You mentioned earlier about the house price being cut in half.
Well, they will. That's another story that's between the seller and the buyer. I mean, if you have a flood-prone property with multiple flood claims, you can bet you're not going to get what you think you ought to get for it. But if you have a property in a flood zone that's never been flooded and has a base flood elevation of the first floor that's at 11 feet,
Mine's almost 12.
well, then you can look them in the face and say, well, what are you worried about? Yes, you got to buy the policy, and you're going to have to write a check for something, but it's not a
That's
big
what I'd like
issue.
to ask FEMA.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Fred Swope, 19 Redwood. I have one question and one comment. The map line that Google puts out goes through the house, and so the landward side has like shadowed, and it says 10 feet. It says VE 10 feet, and then the other side says 13, where the bay is. So, and I have a bulkhead, which is the comment. I mean, when we went for the bulkhead, you needed structural engineers with criteria to certify the bulkhead then. So what am I getting certified now?
Well, did you have a document from the engineer that they said this bulkhead will withstand a 100-year event? No?
Whatever the documents were required for the township.
Well, that was to get a permit.
That was for the permit.
That was the permit to build it.
Okay.
Now, if the guy built it, he should be willing for a rather modest fee to give you a letter that says, yeah, I built it right.
Okay. So that would be from the engineer who did the design?
Correct.
Okay, okay. What about the line going through the house?
Well, the VE 11 versus the VE 13.
Yeah,
That's a winner that I haven't figured out either. Why suddenly this 2 feet higher, and that has to do with their wave modeling thing.
right.
It doesn't matter. The V zone is what counts.
Okay, so, and my first floor should be, if it's 10, my first floor should be 14?
If the VE is the VE 11, your first floor has to be a foot above that.
Okay, okay. All right, thank you.
Is there one question for you, sir? Is your house on pilings?
No,
Then you're not in conforming.
You're not a compliant.
You're not a compliant property anyway.
oh, all right.
Become compliant.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem. You see, all these houses were built without any flood hazards anywhere, so they just built on block foundations.
Right.
Well, if it's now a V zone, it's non-compliant, and non-compliant means one thing and one thing only, that you'd have to put the house on pilings to be compliant, and that ain't happening.
No.
So
So, but if he certifies his bulkhead,
then you get
Then
out.
he's-
Then you're out of the V zone, and then you're good,
Yeah.
and you don't have to worry about what the house is built on.
Right, so certify the bulkhead and put the for sale sign up, right?
Good evening. My name is Luann Lebwall. We live in Cape May Beach. I have two questions. I'm confused by all of this. But one, I'm on Fern and Shore, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken...
Can you speak into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I talk with my hands.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Farrell said that he had gone, or someone said he had gone from Fern south.
Correct.
Sorry. God, that's bad. From Fern south.
Correct.
Did you...
No,
Why was Fern...
because that's where the beach road takes a jog inland.
Okay.
So there's houses between the beach road and the bay shore north of Fern Road.
But they're on the same beach that
That's
my
okay.
house is on.
Fine, that's okay, but that's just the way they drew the maps.
Okay.
Beach
I
Road-
can't see it for sure on this map, so I will check online.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I'm not I think you just answered that. If we are now in a V zone, we need flood insurance.
Correct.
But if we're in a V zone
If you
and
have-
not built up,
Well,
in other words, if our elevation is below whatever it's supposed to be, and I'm not built up on stilts, I won't get flood
now
insurance,
you'll get it,
but it'll cost me...
but it'll cost you an arm and a leg, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Fern North is where the V zone applies to the houses. From Fern South
On the other
to
side of
the
Fern.
Lincoln Boulevard, coming north from the boulevard that goes to the ferry, you have Beach Road runs along the edge. Well, that stops at Fern, takes a jog inland, and then continues north. Yes. And there are houses between the road and the bay, north of Fern Road, up the bay.
Right.
And so that's where the problem begins, because nobody's in the V zone south of Fern Road all the way down to Lincoln Boulevard. There are some A zone flooding areas down near the boulevard, but not V zone properties.
Hi, Doug Pittman, Miami Avenue North. There's a big long bulkhead along there. Is there any information that has the top of bulkhead that we could look at readily?
What's the street?
The Miami Avenue North, right along the beach. We have a bunch of other homeowners right here. So I was wondering what the top of the bulkhead measurement was, since you said they took a lot of those measurements. And I have one other question other than that.
Miami's what, south, or is it?
North, it's all the way.
Is-
The last
Pretty-
street.
pretty close
Last
to
Is
the
that,
last-
is that information available someplace, or do you?
He's
Is
looking
it
it up right now.
Oh, I know that.
You can
but-
ask your second question while he's looking it up.
Was Hurricane Sandy considered the one in a 100-year storm?
No,
Why is that?
wasn't a 100-year storm.
Oh,
Down here, it was like a 50-year storm.
oh. So a 100-year storm would basically flush out Cape May to the ocean.
No,
Cape May County, no?
no, No, it would have been a lot worse, but, no, the wave run-up in Avalon was about 14.5 feet on the dunes. The same storm in Long Branch, New Jersey, wave run-up was 25 feet on the dunes.
Yeah.
So 25-foot elevation, so it's 10 foot higher.
Yeah.
Bigger problem.
Well, if you can't find it,
Okay,
maybe.
here it is.
All right.
This is site number 57. This is an extensive bulkhead structure covering 5 dwellings and 1 vacant lot extending north from Miami Avenue, Villas.
Right.
Okay? The bulkhead is positioned just above the zone where the dune vegetation could survive. Top elevations range from 9.43 to 9.88 feet NAVD 88. Now, this is the top of the horizontal structures, not the individual piling tops, because they don't count.
Yeah, right.
So you are,
What number?
essentially, it's site number 57.
Oh, I got it.
So they're 9.43 to 9.88, the BFE is 8 something. So this would qualify if the engineer says it would withstand the 100-year storm event.
Okay.
They are pilings.
Yeah, it is.
He means the house.
Oh, no, the house would then be out of the V zone. So it doesn't matter what your house could be on tissue paper, doesn't matter. Put it on a barge.
Yeah, there was something was said about letters being sent out to property owners that were affected. Now, is that if your classification
V-zone.
changed?
V-zone only.
Yeah. Oh,
It's a
okay.
V-zone meeting.
Because I mean, I went from a B to an AE8, but I never got a letter.
This meeting was just for the appeal based on Dr. Farrell's
Oh,
report
okay.
and the response from FEMA,
Those letters
that
come
if you had a
from township.
bulkhead,
There'll be another
Get-
FEMA meeting coming up.
get a change to it. They didn't
Oh,
accept, Dr. Farrell made a lot of different arguments, but these are the
Right.
ones they accepted.
Okay, because I thought I seen something about affected property
We
owners.
can only work on the ones that were accepted
Who
by
sent those
FEMA.
letters out? Township or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's
Kathleen Arena, quick question. If you're already on pilings, your house is up, and for everybody here who's on pilings may have this question, I don't know. How do I find out if I'm high enough?
You have to have what's called an elevation certificate. That is done by a NJ licensed surveyor. Most any of them will do it if they're willing to do them. Costs you about $7 to get it done. And they essentially come and they measure all of the ground all around the house, the elevations of the grade, so that's important, and then they measure the elevation of the bottom of the first horizontal structural member of that piling support system. It's not the first floor anymore, it's that horizontal timber that holds up the floor joists on the piling support structure. That has to be above the V-zone height.
Okay.
So if that's VE 11, the bottom of that structure has to be 11 or better.
Okay, and if it is 11,
Then
that's high enough.
then your flood insurance, yes, and your flood insurance will reflect, the rate will reflect that.
Now, the one thing to remember, if you have any habitable space under there without breakaway walls, your first floor is going to be the ground,
Yeah.
not the, am I correct?
Yes, you're not supposed to have habitable space under the building if it's on pilings.
Right.
I mean, you could store stuff under there, like a kayak or,
Whatever,
put the
right.
car you only use at the shore under there, that's fine. But they walled these off along the ocean front in Long Beach Island over and over and over again. The guy that works for me, his dad has a house on the bay, and it took a group of 6 guys 3 days to get all the washing machines, freezers, barbecue grills, golf carts out of his garage, because they came all the way from the ocean across the island and went right into his garage because his house faced the street end from the ocean. And so there was, at the top of the pile was a boat, still on his trailer, stuck in his garage. So all of this stuff that people put under their houses, and that included hot water heaters, freezers, washing machines, dryers, air conditioning units, barbecue grills, everything. It was all destroyed. But it's not supposed to be there. That's the whole point of the piling supported structure in the first place.
Right, I understand that. Okay, so what about the the gas? You talked about the gas that runs to the house?
Yeah.
The meter?
Well,
That's not a part of that structure?
the company, South Jersey Gas has been, deciding whether to raise these up in flood zones because the gas was escaping everywhere after Sandy in Holgate. We had been told, don't light a cigarette, please. Oh, none of us smoke. We're going to leave the car. We're going to walk. You could smell gas everywhere. It was just hissing out of the 2-inch lines are just roaring out of the lines because it swept the meters right off the buildings.
Okay. All right, so this new information about that elevation of 11, any surveyor who's licensed in New Jersey knows this already?
Yes, they know what to do as far as an elevation. It's called an elevation cert or an elevation certificate.
Right,
I
okay.
just did one in Cape May Point. Cost me $740. It's 700 square foot property.
Hi. Happy. This is just a quickie question. You gave me a 9.43 and a 9.88 on the bulkhead. Now, do we need to have that surveyed? Is that
Yes.
official?
Yes, you got it.
Even though so in other words, this might not be an accurate.
Well, it's accurate. I can't
But I
sign
need a
it
cert
for you.
for something that they measured already.
I can't sign it for you.
Okay.
I'm not licensed in the state of New Jersey to sign surveys.
All right, you were saying that we lost the funding because it was environmental rather than protection. Has the township now gone back to the state because the federal government is saying that this is protection now? Have we gone back and said this isn't the case and can we get this funding?
We have another program.
What
Well,
should be-
no, it wasn't that the project, this was an Army Corps project. The project was designated environmental or ecological. If you look on their map, they show it going all the way down the ocean. When you come around to our side, it's a different color.
Because it's the
different
bay
class.
and they recognize that
But
we're at
hurricane,
risk.
no, it's the
but
funding. Hurricane Sandy money cannot be used for
But now
type
that the
of
federal
project.
government is saying we're at the same risk as a barrier island in North Carolina on the bay, can we not then appeal to the state and say, look, this is now an environmental protection?
Being honest about it, this might be the time to talk about the coastal resiliency grant that
Right,
we're
we-
working on.
What we are working on, they did give us a grant that we're going to start working on hopefully soon. As soon as we get the grant agreement, it's at our attorneys now, and the mayor's going to have to
Right.
sign it, where we're going to design a project for the whole bayfront.
You got to hit the microphone, Bill.
For a beach fill, and there's a lot involved in it, but hopefully.
It's a long study.
It's from the Department of Interior. The only thing I caution you, it's through the National Wildlife Foundation, so you can imagine what they may want and they may not want us to do. So it's a long road. It's going to take you 2 years to design.
2 years, and it'll
And
be
then-
shovel-ready type of deal.
The goal of it is to be shovel-ready with all the permits. Then we take that and go look for some money.
We go shopping so that, like, as soon as funding comes up, we say, hey, we got the right project. They're spending this resiliency grants up to $250,000 for engineering studies along the bayfront over the next 2 years, with particular emphasis on, say, Coxhole Creek, Fishing Creek, those entrance points through storms. But it's a combination not only for the environment and for the birds and the horseshoe crabs, but also for, potential flooding coming through there.
And to answer your other question is, yes, I was there multiple times when the mayor and different councilmen have called up the DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, and asked them to fund this project that they said they were going to fund originally. But
And they said no?
well, they haven't. They just said it's not fundable.
They've
because
never
of the
forgiven us for not having it done.
classification.
20 years ago, we turned it down. That's what Stu was talking about. And they hold long grudges.
Well, there is a thing called Buoy Site 10. It is out in Delaware Bay, close to the navigation channel at the mouth of Delaware Bay. There's 500,000 cubic yards of sand sitting out there that's easily accessible, and there's probably another 500,000 that they could probably mine without causing Fish and Wildlife to go absolutely catatonic. That is the source of the sand the Corps of Engineers was looking to get. But unfortunately, they have to handle it twice. They have to pick it up and put it in a barge, and then bring the barge as close as they can to the shoreline. You know what it's like out there. It's 1,000 feet of knee-deep water at high tide, so they have to then pump it ashore from the barge, from a station that they move along the beach as they build it. So it's going to cost about $18 to $22 a cubic yard to do it, times 1 million yards. There's the money.
One other question, was the hurricane that was in the bay in the 60s considered a 100-year storm?
No. Hurricane Gloria was 1985. It was the most damaging event that I know about from my history here. But that Hurricane Gloria wiped out Thompson's Beach and Moore's Beach and did a lot of damage at Reed's Beach. And that was considered to be a better than a 50-year storm. Sandy was not.
So basically, in recorded history, there's never been a 100-year storm in the.
Well, they don't know what it really looks like in person, shall we put it that way. They calculated it at elevation of 8.3 feet, and how they got that is the mathematics of it.
Steve Weiss, and I live at Beach Avenue in the Villas. For those of us who don't have bulkheads, because I'm hearing an awful lot tonight about bulkheads until just now about this other alternate project, which is more environmental. If you go ahead with the environmental project and 2 years down the road you get something signed and then you do the project and maybe it's 3 or 4 or 5 years, but it gets done, is there any possible hope at the end of that that would give relief to property owners who do not have bulkheads?
As I understand it from Mr. Gengai, if the frontal dune profile exceeds 540 square feet of cross-sectional area above the BFE, then it becomes a shore protection feature. And that becomes the limit. The crest of the dune becomes the V-zone limit then. But
So knowing a little bit we know about this environmental project, is that going to happen or not?
You know,
Are they really going to build a
it's
dune?
worth step one. It took us a year of intense lobbying to get this thing to where we're at now. And I mean, sincerely, we fought like the Dickens with Cindy with our help up at the state, the DEP. And now we're at the point, and I mean, we began this December a year ago trying to get this thing. And we're at the point now where it looks like we have it. And that'll be EDA, I believe, is the
Correct. Yes.
and they're going to take a look. Like I said, they're going to do aerials, they're going to do everything, and come with a game plan for the bayfront. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means that they're going to have the engineering studies ready, and hopefully we can shop that study and go to the interior, go to the different, places, and say, well, we have a project that's ready to go. And what specifically that will be, I don't know, Steve. I'm just saying that it holds some hope for what we're looking at if we don't.
I'm just asking the question because
I don't know the answer.
I don't
yet.
have a mortgage. I could afford not to have life insurance while I live in that house for the foreseeable future, but not forever because I'm not that young.
No.
And I would prefer not to build a bulkhead. The other problem is I know my next door neighbor will not build a bulkhead because he doesn't have the money. So if I just build a bulkhead across my property, it seems kind of like I'm spending a lot of money, and it may save me money over the long run in flood insurance, but it's not going to do the township a whole lot of good if we get a big storm.
Oh, no, this is it.
It's going to come.
This is basically self-protection. You have to look at which is worse, 10 years or 15 years of flood insurance payments, or build the bulkhead and no flood insurance payments. And one is
That's a decision I have to make.
yes, that is your decision to make.
Okay, thank you.
Would you call her? Okay, just real quick, and this is the last one because we want to bring the lady with the insurance up.
I'm just curious, if you build a big dune out in the bay, won't that eventually end up on Bayshore Drive because of the westerlies?
Well,
I've just noticed how the sand moves all the time anyway, so.
A lot of these projects, like for instance, the one that we're looking at over on in Diamond Beach, if you sign off on them, they guarantee. Remember the one we?
Yeah, well, right now, the Army Corps of Engineers has a project on our ocean front. It goes from Hereford Inlet to Cape May Inlet which would build a 16-foot elevation berm the entire length. And that's something that they've been working on, I think, for 12 years.
But if we sign off, if the sand goes for
And then-
50 years or something?
Right, then they would maintain it for the next 50 years.
Right, so
That's the design frame,
Yeah.
correct?
there's a good chance I won't be here.
Probably.
No guarantees.
Probably not.
All right, if you could, front and center, thank you. There we go. Thank you, Stu.
This is Lisa Miola from the J. Byrne Agency. You can ask specific questions if you like.
Do you want is the microphone, do you want a microphone right there? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Wireless.
Thank you.
All right.
You have
I
one.
don't know if this will work. Can you hear through this?
Yep. It's on, Ed. I
It's
can
on,
hear you.
Ed.
Oh, okay.
Probably not.
Well, here's my question. I understand there was a bill that was sent in, actually is sponsored by Mendez, Congressman Mendez, and also Booker. And the bill was drawn up, and it gated the first one with the insurance as far as what the cost would be. And it was signed by President Obama. It's in effect. Now, with that, it grandfathers the people that own the property along the waterfront. Their insurance cannot be increased more than 15% a year by the insurance companies. And if you have it now, that's supposed to be the maximum. Could you explain that to me and just see where it's at and that bill itself? If it's grandfathered, the new owners coming in and buying the property will be grandfathered.
There are so many factors that get involved with grandfathering. One, of course, is the year it was built. If it was built prior to the firm, which is when the community entered the flood rating of the FEMA program, then you have to have maintained continuous insurance to be able to be grandfathered.
So it's hard for me to hear you on that. Is that loud enough?
Is mine working?
I can't tell from back here.
I don't know. He told me he can't hear me. Okay. For grandfathering, there's two methods you could be grandfathered. One is if it was built to compliance to FEMA's code at the time of construction. If it's a pre-firm, there were no FEMA codes in place. So what you have to do at that point is have the continuous coverage, if you maintain the continuous coverage. We did, when Bigger Waters came out, you're absolutely right. Everybody was going to lose grandfathering, which was horrific.
Right.
So that's what made the mapping even that much more devastating for everybody, because we didn't have grandfathering. With the Homeowners Insurance Flood Affordability Act, that was the one positive thing we got back, was our grandfathering, okay? So you definitely will have the ability, as long as your property qualifies for grandfathering, of either of those two things. If it's a pre-firm built prior to the program, okay, you have to make sure you've maintained your insurance. You can't let it lapse. Building can't be substantially improved, because if once you substantially improve it, you have to bring it to code there. Okay? So you're right. You're absolutely right. You can get grandfathered. And those policies currently, that was another thing that they were taking away on Bigger Waters, but currently you can transfer flood insurance from one owner to another. Okay? So, and that's great. If you substantially alter, improve, change, if you have a fire, anything like that, you're going to have to bring it up to code, and then you're going to be subject to the current map rates, okay? There's nothing they can do about that.
All right, so everything stays status quo. We'll go back to my personal property. It was built in 1998.
Okay.
That was before any of this transpired. It was within code at the time. All the permits were there for the township. Everything was fine. I maintained my insurance right on through. Last year it only increased 10%, which I'm grateful for. But now when I read that, and the way this law states right now, if I keep maintaining it, and anybody else has property, it did the same thing. I don't care what it's on. it could be on a slab. As long as it was maintained and came within code, then they're okay to keep it that way. And if they want to sell it, we'll go to, unless they had a disaster like you just mentioned.
When they're talking grandfathering, the only advantage you're getting with grandfathering is that map. You're getting that map. If it's, instead of the V zone, you're getting the A. Instead of the base flood being 12 feet, you're keeping it at 9. But if you transfer it to another person, they're going to get the map grandfathering, but usage affects your rate. If it's a primary, a secondary, that max that they told you that it was going to, the rate increases have gone out the window, because not only are you getting the rate increases, there are different fees that are being added on to there.
And I'm right, you're saying that actually it had to be a permanent residence and not a second home.
Right. Oh, there are different, the
one.
fee alone from a primary, I mean your principal residence,
Right.
to a secondary, that's a $225 fee difference right there before the rate increase. But that's not part of the grandfathering, that's just part of the rating
The
structure.
fees, yeah, okay,
Right.
the increases and whatever has to
And I'm
be.
just a messenger. But the biggest thing is that you're knowledgeable and you're aware of what things are available to you with the grandfathering and items like that. The maps are going to change, so you have to position yourself as best as you can and take advantage of things like the grandfathering as long as they're in existence. Okay.
Well, actually, when they come to the long run, as long as it's maintained that way, and as long as you have the insurance to go along with it, it'd still be cheaper than trying to put a bulkhead in the long run, whatever the cost of that bulkhead would be over a period of time.
Absolutely.
So it's a matter of a personal choice, and look at it and make sure anybody that has the insurance, keep it up, and
Absolutely.
Don't let it go. All right, thank you.
You are more than welcome.
Kim, you mentioned the Flood Affordability Act. The mayor's made some copies of what's entailed in that HR 3370, the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act. So for those people that are interested in having that, we can.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that, and anybody else who wants one, there to go.
Okay, so my question before was about the elevation. So if your house, and I'll find out, if I have an elevation certificate that shows that my house is at a high enough level, 11 or above, then insurance is not, I'm not going to be affected by insurance increases, if I can prove that, correct?
Everybody's going to get affected by insurance increases no matter what, but as long as everything is in compliance and you're at the positive elevations, and you don't even have to get new elevation certificates when they go into the new maps and the datum, they have converters for everybody. Okay, so you should be fine. If everything is there and it's up to code, you can use your existing elevation certificate. Okay,
Yeah, I'm just saying if I'm at a high enough elevation
Right.
already, and I can prove that, then my insurance, I mean, it's going to go up whatever percentage that's going to be every year naturally anyhow, but it's not going to skyrocket.
No.
Because of that.
I mean, and if it's a map change, I think that was the biggest thing, that when you saw those horrific pricing differences, that was going like an A to a V. Okay, that's a huge difference, because the construction code for an A building allows for enclosures, and your base flood is usually lower. And going to a V zone, you're going to have, it's supposed to be steel reinforced beams. It's just the construction cost alone could be $40,000 to $80,000 from an A zone structure to a V zone, because they're built for the height and velocity of the waves. Okay, so if you're staying in the same zone, even with a change possibly in the base flood, as long as you're high enough, you're going to see the normal rate changes, but you're not going to see those horrific.
Right.
Okay? If you want a card, you can call and ask me anything. I could look at your individual property for you.
Great.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Couple quick questions again.
Sure.
If it's a secondary residence, can it still be grandfathered?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're still eligible for the grandfathering. It's the rating for a secondary versus a primary and the fees.
Okay, and you mentioned continuous flood insurance coverage. Suppose the
Correct.
owner 30 years from before I bought the place, didn't have flood insurance.
As long as you've had it.
As long as I
You
had it
should
from the
be
time
able
I bought
to,
it.
you know, as long as you, from your time of ownership,
Right.
and you can produce,
Thank you.
okay?
Okay, wrap it up.
If your map is changing, when you talk about grandfathering, it's if my house is in an A zone now, okay, and with the initial maps that came out, my house was put into a B zone.
When he's done, I want
Okay.
if there's questions, they can.
As long as my house wasn't substantially improved or altered after that term, okay, your house is able to be written and mapped under two different circumstances for grandfathering. One is it wasn't altered and it was built to compliance up to FEMA code. There were no variances, you know, that were signed off on or anything like that. You're able to keep that A zone rating. Or the other would be, and this gets more into the circumstances, which a lot of people here have that, the homes that are built prior to the initiation of the National Flood Insurance Program. So they're called pre-firm. So there was no code to comply with when your buildings were built. So then your area of grandfathering would be, you can provide proof of continuous coverage while it was from the initial map. So then you're eligible for grandfathering. As long as they keep grandfathering, you'd be eligible. No, you at this point, at this time, again, they had taken it away for a little while with bigger waters, but you can transfer flood from one owner to another owner at this point. The rate will change based on their usage, but the grandfathering as far as the maps would stay in play. Oh, absolutely. I could double check for you. Yes.
What if you, like, our house was in a 500-year zone before all this.
Okay.
We didn't need
Mhm.
and now it has a basement. So what are our options for that? I mean, you can't raise something with a concrete basement.
No, you can't.
So
What year was it built?
50s, I think.
50s, okay, so that's going to be a pre-firm. Before the maps change, what you can do is get the coverage in place for a B zone. You're going to get preferred rates. You'll eventually lose the preferred rates and go to a B rate without the preferred. It's higher, but it might not be as high as an A. Beyond that, if if you're going to have a mortgage, you're going to have to try and get in there and keep it and get it. The B's get it. And you're just going right now. You don't need an elevation certificate as long as you're in a B zone. You could actually. Oh, you're in the X? You should be able to get a policy without an elevation certificate. And then you could get preferred for a while. Yeah. Now, you're not going to be able to get the grandfathering on continuous insurance because you haven't had it all along, but you might be able to at least take advantage of the B zone until they change it over to the A.
There's some sort of grace period, so if we're going to knock the house down, or, I mean, do we not have to have insurance that is ridiculous? Like, what, just put a ballpark figure, what would the flood zone insurance, if I have a basement, I can do anything I want to do?
Is it a finished basement or unfinished? I mean, you could very easily be looking at $4,000 or $5,000. Very easily, even though it's unfinished. Now, a crawl space, not so bad.
We can fill it in.
Okay.
Or shoveling dirt.
Crawl
Yeah, you
spaces
fill it
aren't going to
in.
be so
Be over
bad.
there tonight.
And especially if your first floor
Be over there
is
tonight.
at base flood or higher.
First floor's like at 14 feet, I think.
Yeah. So,
Fill in
do
your
you have an
base.
elevation certificate? The $30,000 insurances are going to be if you're in an A zone and you're built to A spec, and it's a V zone, and you're not eligible for any grandfathering or anything of that nature, okay? I had one that it was mapped incorrectly, and it was built to A spec, brand new construction, okay? So there were all kinds of enclosures and an elevator, and it was a beautiful beachfront property, and when they came out and they did an audit, they found that it was actually located partially in a V zone. And as long as part of that building is in a V zone, they have to use the highest hazard. Okay? So, and it's not eligible for grandfathering because it wasn't a change in the map. It was a change in the mapping method, and the price literally went from like 685 to like 36,000. But it's a very extreme case. So, you know, as long as these properties are being built to spec, there are alternatives. Not everybody's automatically getting this death sentence.
With the insurance?
Yeah, I know.
Sir.
They're brutal. Some of them, even the property is touched by the line, they want to charge you.
Yeah, that's what I mean, it's property along the river. The whole rest of it wasn't in the flood zone. and they Had them up to 3,500 on it, $350.
All this
Yeah, the
reason why we're here
Yeah, just the property.
has to do with flood insurance, that's it? I mean, is this going to affect homeowners or?
Yeah,
It's going to affect everything, because if that house has a fire, now it's got to be built when it's reconstructed. Even if you don't get flood insurance, the construction of the house is now going to change because it's based in a V zone. So it goes beyond just your flood insurance, okay?
So you expect raises to your homeowner?
The only thing, I don't think so much based on your V zones. What you should be looking at is your law and ordinance coverage. If your house burns to the ground and there was a change in the mapping and your costs are now $85,000 higher because you have to bring everything up to a V zone code and you were in an A or an X, okay, that's going to make a significant impact. And the company, you know, in a fire is going to pay for what was lost. There's some coverage for law and ordinance built into your policies, typically like 10%, maybe up to 50%. That's something that everybody should be looking at in those particular cases. So it's not just flood insurance, it's just even your own construction. If you decide you want to do an addition on your house, you know.
No, I'm just saying, bottom line now, I'm just looking at, don't
Yeah.
have the money to spend, don't have any more money
Right.
to spend, just living out the rest of my life there,
Right.
basically. Don't have a mortgage, don't have flood insurance.
Okay.
Just, I don't have to do anything, I'm safe, is somebody gonna drop a hammer on me, or, you know, what's gonna happen?
Are
Not me.
taxes going to be affected by
Not-
flood
not-
zones at all?
Not us.
So I don't have to do an appeal, I don't have to do anything.
No.
I just ride it out, ride
No,
out the storm.
it's fine. He owns a home.
He owns it outright, you don't have
Yeah,
to do a
you
damn
can do what you want.
Right.
And
You're, at that point,
you
you're
will-
self-insuring.
You will it to the next generation. You
Yeah.
give it away at the end.
Yeah.
They don't owe anything on it either, so the next generation doesn't have to buy insurance either.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, it could affect your retail.
Yeah, I
Your
know.
resale, rather.
And when I built the house, I had tons of money, and, you know what I'm saying? And I didn't, you know, it was just a
You're one
summer
step
home.
above me. I never have tons of money.
Now, the stock market crashed, and a lot of bad things happened
Yeah.
over the last 10 years.
Other than, I mean, it has further
If you won, you won, you lost, you lost.
than
Yeah.
just your
That's the way it
flood
was.
insurance or your
After the
homeowner's
64
insurance. It'll get into
storm here.
construction costs, your resale value.
I'm finally doing it. There was some really
Possibly,
bad Mississippi
at some
River
point,
floods.
maybe your taxes a little bit,
That's what triggered
depending on what's involved with the kids and, you know, all the mitigation necessary, you know, to help the community as a whole. But, you know, as far as such a big.
Wait, this lady has a
impact on
question.
people.
This will be the last question right now.
It was the double-edged sword.
I used to live in Parktown, tuckered in there, and I paid
Right.
3 times as much for insurance, and the guy said, on top of the dude in Holgate. You know, under the old rules.
Well, I don't know if we will send notification to everybody, but we will certainly have it on our website, and we certainly will publish it. So what I would suggest is that you keep an eye on our website at this point. You know, I mean, this would involve more than just the V zones.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're looking at a significant number of people that would be involved here. But we'll make sure that there's proper and adequate coverage as far as that. Lisa, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who came tonight, thank council, thank Eileen, the manager, especially Stu, for the work that he's done, and Bill. And if you have any further questions, feel free to come up and speak individually, to talk with Lisa or with Stu or Bill. But thank you and good night.